Now, at a certain point in our racing careers, as it were, there comes a certain point where our improvement seems to slow down, if not stop altogether. No matter how much you practice or race, you don't seem to get any better. What you've hit is something that a lot of people who do this sort of thing also hit: the wall. Overcoming this wall can be very difficult for many people, and lots of times, it can be very discouraging to see your progress as a driver come to a halt. So much so that some people pretty much just give up on trying to get better or give up racing altogether if it's really bad. That's where I'm here to help you. Think of this as another entry to How to Improve Your Driving series, part 5 as it were. In this video, I'm going to go over some ways you can overcome the dreaded wall. Before we begin, I'd like to take this time to remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and be sure to like the video if you enjoy it. It helps out a lot. Alright, let's get started. Now, one problem that a lot of drivers seem to face a lot of the time, especially when they're trying to go faster, is, well, overdriving their car. I remember watching a JQ video a while ago. I don't remember exactly which one, I'll see if I can find it, but basically he said that most of the time when people are learning how to race in most motorsports, the problem is driving too slowly, doing things like braking too early, not accelerating early enough or hard enough in a corner, and generally being very timid behind the wheel for fear of, well, what he goes on to say is that in RC, it's generally the opposite, as the fear of personal injury just isn't really there. As a result, people tend to overdrive their cars in an attempt to go faster, doing things like braking way too late for corners and overshooting them, accelerating way too early and too suddenly, not allowing their car to settle in and find grip, overshooting jumps, that sort of thing. JQ is pretty on the money when it comes to this for the most part. We'll get to the other side of the coin in a bit, but let's focus on this specific problem first. I tend to see a lot of people do this when they either fall behind via a bad crash, or someone is behind them putting the pressure on. The best way to notice if you fall into this category of driving is if you feel like people who aren't driving as hard as you are still faster than you and passing you. If it feels like you're putting in a lot of work for not a whole lot of gain, you're probably overdriving your car. And here are some ways to remedy this. Something that a lot of people tend to say that will help you stay consistent on the track is to drive at 80 to 90% during your qualifiers and even mains if need be. This doesn't just mean braking a bit sooner or not going 100% over jumps, as those are just part of it. You see, when people drive at or above their limit, they tend to make very sudden and jarring inputs to their car. Depending on how your car is set up, this can upset it very quickly and make the car extremely unstable. When we're driving within our limits, those inputs tend to be much smoother. As a result, the car isn't under as much stress as if you were to be beating your controller as if it owes you money. Not only that, but since you're not really pushing yourself too hard, it won't be difficult to maintain a tighter racing line consistently and for much longer periods of time without crashing or making errors. On top of that, with smoother inputs, it gives the car more time to adjust to said inputs and find better grip. This isn't something that applies as much to higher grip surfaces like turf or especially carpet, where you can sort of treat the throttle as an on and off switch, but dirt, especially loose dirt, smoother inputs are the way to go. Now, if you're like me, when it comes to racing, you have the opposite problem. I tend to have a very reserved, if not timid, driving style, often to my detriment. I really felt this very recently at my last excursion to Loganville RC Complex, where I decided to run the Pro E-Buggy class for the first time. Prior, I've been used to being able to do well in Sportsman, or even Intermediate, by simply driving smoothly, if a bit slowly, and not making any mistakes, as that seemed to be my strength for a while. However, even though I was able to make it through a qualifier without crashing or making any mistakes, I simply wasn't fast enough to compete with the top 5. A little bit of a side tangent here. This is where me and a lot of other people tend to fall into a bit of a trap, as my immediate response to this was simply, maybe I should change the center diff fluid. Might want to go up in thickness. Maybe a thinner sway bar will help me out in the tighter bends, lower ride height, something, I don't know. I like to call this trap setup fever, where you start chasing that setup change that will magically allow your car to compete at a higher level and elevate your driving. And whereas this can sometimes work if you have something very wrong in your setup that is holding you back, generally, if you have a decent setup and more importantly, the right tires, at that point, it's your driving that must improve. Anyway, my problem seemed to be that I simply drove too slowly. No, don't click off yet. Here's what I mean. In certain corners, I would brake way too early and lots of times would take corners very wide in order to avoid clipping the pipe. I guess a better term for my issue is that I drove way too safely, and I know a decent amount of people who have the same issue. Yes, at a beginner to sportsman level, driving safely usually net you a win. However, at an intermediate and especially pro level, you need to take those extra steps and extra risks. We'll get to that risk part later. Now, there are a few different reasons why someone may want to drive more conservatively compared to others who may want to drive like a mayhem insurance guy. For some people, it would be the fear of breaking something. This is something I completely understand, as these cars are expensive, and when they break, it can sometimes be pretty expensive to fix. And also, nobody likes being taken out of a race prematurely due to a part malfunction. The best way I can really say to remedy this would be to minimize the amount of things that can go wrong. Glue your tires properly the first time so they don't come off, build your car properly with proper Loctite, tighten your wheel nuts down, make sure your batteries are fully charged, and make sure you're properly maintaining your car with fresh bearings, outdrives, and fluids before they go bad. Of course, these measures aren't foolproof and sometimes things can just go wrong, but it's better to have made the attempt to minimize the chances of something going wrong than just sending it and hoping for the best. Secondly, lots of times people get intimidated when they get on the driver's stand, and as a result, drive more slowly. This is something that can only be remedied by experience, as over time and the more time you drive, the less nervous you'll be getting on that driver's stand. And lastly, sometimes you don't want to get in other people's way or ruin someone else's run. Look, even though it isn't encouraged, and you can get a penalty for making contact with another car on purpose, 98% of the time, it isn't on purpose. If you do make contact with someone on the track and you apologize, most of the time it's resolved then and there. If they want to stay mad, that's on them. Don't make it your problem. With all that being said, what are some other ways you can improve that you may not have tried yet? Remember when I said in the overdriving section about driving at 80 to 90% can make you faster? Well, I'm going to now throw that off the back porch and say that driving at 100% can also make you faster. Let me explain. When learning or improving on any skill, you need to venture out of your comfort zone in order to improve on those skills. To illustrate my metaphor, I've brought you to Rocket League. Bear with me, I promise this will make sense. Now, when I first started playing this game, there were certain things that I simply couldn't do, like aerials, flicks, and dribbles. During my early playtime, I simply never attempted to do anything really spicy, as I knew that if I did, I'd simply whiff and give my opponents an easy shot into my goal. Eventually, as I began to get more comfortable with the game, I began to make riskier and riskier plays, including going for stupid stuff that deep down I knew I wouldn't be able to get. That didn't stop me, however, and after attempt, after whiff, after loss, I would finally hit an aerial shot. Suddenly, that same tech that seemed completely out of reach skill-wise was now possible, and you know what? The more I did it, the easier and more second nature it became. Coming back to real toy cars again, this can apply to pretty much any technique you can think of you may find too difficult. For example, aerial control is something that a lot of people in this hobby don't really get a hang of, as most people simply aren't willing to risk making an aerial mistake that will cause their car to possibly break. Also, chances are if it's your first time trying to make corrections in the air, you're going to get it wrong. However, if you keep trying over and over again, eventually you're going to get it right. Like I said before, this applies not only to aerial control, but fast driving in general. Once you start to push your car and your own driving skills to their limits, you get a better understanding of how to breach them. And this leads me to how to effectively practice. If you drive at what you feel is 80 to 90% of your full potential, you're never going to realize that potential or improve on it. Practice time is a perfect time to see what you can get away with, while trying to improve on things that you may not be able to do. Doing things during practice like running a little bit of a tighter line here and there, trying to carry more speed through corners, experimenting with aerial control, and other things you may not be comfortable with are all part of improving your driving and finding your limit. Like I said before, unless you're willing to take risks on the track, you're never going to get any faster. The last thing I want to go over is the mental side of this problem. A lot of people I race with, particularly older racers, tend to have a bit of a, for lack of a better term, defeatist attitude when it comes to improving their driving. They'll say things like, oh, I'm not going to get any better at this point, or I'm far past my prime for hand-eye coordination. They get into this mindset that they will never be at the top level and sort of give up on trying to improve. Now, if you stayed long enough in this video to make it to this point, first off, thank you. But also, you need to hear this. No matter how old you are, no matter how talentless you think you might be, you can improve. Now, you may not be the next Spencer Rivkin or Joe Bornhorst, but you're never going to find out if you don't try to improve at your driving. So next time you're out on the track for a practice day or even a club race, try pushing yourself a little bit. And next time, try pushing a bit harder. Yes, you may crash. Yes, you may break something. But with enough time, you'll overcome that wall. That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, feel free to like the video and comment on any other ways you think might be a good way to overcome that wall. Doing either of these things really helps out the channel in more ways than you think. Speaking of which, if you want to help my channel further, you can subscribe to my Patreon, where I post teasers to my next videos and updates behind the scenes. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my patrons Michael Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Ben Reeves, Dave Armstrong, Ryan Lamb, Joe Jenkins, Juliet Lovelace, The Mailman 110, Brian Lofton, Precision Key, Rob Bedingfield, Caden Merks, and especially Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.